It's the weapon America's enemies call the Black Death. Quiet, durable, and deadly.
This is the best attack helicopter in the world, bar none.
From its controversial beginnings,
congressional investigators are recommending that the Army scrap its plans to buy 132 helicopters.
to its baptism of hellfire.
The Hellfire is the Apache's ultimate accessory.
This is the inside story of the world's premier attack helicopter. How the Apache had to battle to survive.
The Army really wanted this aircraft, and they were going to fight for it.
Overcome costly mistakes, and prove itself in combat. In 2007, Baghdad. It's 4 years after the fall of Saddam Hussein. Iraq's stability continues to unravel. Insurgents wage a guerrilla-style war in the city's largest ghetto, Sadr City. Ordinary neighborhoods turn into battle zones. American troops and Iraqi policemen struggle to contain the violence.
Coalition forces in Iraq aggressively seek out individuals and groups that oppose our mission.
Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki wants the Iraqis to handle it themselves, but President George Bush sends 20,000 more troops.
Our goal is a democratic Iraq that upholds the rule of law.
Some of the troops head for Sadr City, just north of downtown Baghdad. It's packed with 2.5 million people, many of them angry.
At that point, the government was, hey, well, this needs to be dealt with. And all the focus of the whole country became the Sadr fight.
Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Inbody has been a pilot for over 12 years. He served 2 tours in Iraq.
The rockets were starting to come out of Sadr City and starting to go into the green zone. The legitimacy of the Iraqi government was at stake.
Nearly 80% of Baghdad is already under insurgent forces. If the rest of the city falls, Iraq's new government could fall with it.
Baghdad is the center of gravity for that whole country. Obviously, whoever controls the capital controls the country.
The United States military has the most powerful munitions on Earth at its disposal. When it needs to lock down an entire city, there's one weapon it turns to over and over again: the American-made Apache.
We're here today with the AH-64 Delta attack helicopters, the Army's premier attack platform. The weapon system the aircraft is most known for is a 30mm cannon, which is slung underneath. It's a machine gun, essentially shoots cannon rounds, up to about 650 rounds per minute. When you shoot that gun, all the deck plates in the belly of the aircraft vibrate and rattle. It moves all of your organs inside you. It vibrates your HDU in your eye. It vibrates your retinas. You can feel it in your teeth. It's absolutely crazy.
If the gun doesn't get your attention, the Apache has other options.
You can see installed on the aircraft, on the outboard side, you have a rocket launcher tube. You have a Hellfire missile launcher rack. All of these can be configured and tailored specifically for the mission that the aircraft's going on.
The Apache can dish it out, and it can take it too.
Both crew stations have a ballistically tolerant seat. There's a lot of Kevlar and some ceramic built into it, as well as some Kevlar portions built into the side of the aircraft here itself. This is the most survivable, safest aircraft in the Army inventory, hands down.
February 28th, 2007. Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Inbody and his co-pilot prepared their Apache for a flight over Baghdad.
At first, it was just a regular patrol. It was pretty calm. I mean, it was actually kind of boring, to be honest, and just flying in a circle looking. But that night, for whatever reason, was just the night it turned on.
Just a few minutes into the flight, the Apaches receive an urgent message. Rebel leader Cleric Muqtada al-Sadr has launched a bold offensive. his army threatens to bring its guerrilla war from the streets of the ghetto to the rest of the city.
They activated about 10,000 insurgents that evening. They rolled out in the street. They took over joint security stations, shooting RPGs at everybody, heavy machine gun at everybody they can.
Rebels quickly overwhelmed troops on the ground.
It was kind of like an overrun scenario where all these guys are now coming out of the woodwork armed with military-grade weapons. So we couldn't allow that to happen. That's why the powers that be said this is the fight, and we made it the fight.
To win against El Sadr, American troops and Iraqi police must regain control of the streets. That's where the Apaches come in.
The role was very broad. It was just eliminate the enemy fighters in the area.
El Sadr's fighters count on the night to give them cover for their battle. But nothing can hide from an Apache's roving eye.
At night, the aircraft has the advantage of being able to see in the absence of ambient light, pitch black, zero illumination. This aircraft's fully capable of navigating and engaging targets.
A special sensor in the nose allows the Apache to see at night. It is divided into two sections. The dayside section sees light just like the human eye in the visible spectrum. The other part of the sensor is the night side. It allows the Apache to see in pitch black. The thermal vision night vision sensor detects infrared light emitting from an object. Hotter objects, such as people or vehicles, emit more of this light than cooler objects, like trees or buildings. The sensors project what they see onto a monocular lens, positioned just an inch in front of the pilot's right eye.
This is the monocle that really makes the Apache famous for what it does. Attaches to the helmet, like so, and you just rotate it over your eye and adjust the lens where you need it. At night, this is where all of our infrared sensors is piped into. So we get a green image, green kind of grayscale image of the infrared environment around us. There's not another helicopter out there that does this.
Flying over Baghdad, Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Inbody relies on this night vision sensor to look for insurgent fighters. It isn't long before he and his co-pilot zero in on a strange glow.
This is at 1 in the morning, so there's nobody around. And we found 4, 5, 6 tires on a road, all burning, big Michelin tires on fire.
The Apache hovers, looking around. Its pilots know enough to smell something suspicious.
Why is there nobody here? And then we look down the alleyway. Sure enough, 7 guys in the alleyway.
Are they friend or foe? The crew must be sure. The consequences are life and death.
We wanted to validate who they were, so we swung by again to make a real good look on the objects, and we just counted down the, AK-47, AK-47, PKM, RPG, PKM, AK-47. That's cut and dry. These dudes are obviously fighters, definitely militants.
There is no doubt. It's a dangerous group of insurgents wielding lethal firepower and targeting American troops. Inbody and his gunners circle a group of insurgents hiding near a pile of burning tires. It's a classic setup for an ambush. The burning tires block traffic while the Iraqi militants lay in wait.
These guys were setting up a checkpoint to engage American forces. They'll be around the tires because that's the obstacle in the road that blocks the vehicle, and then they'll take the vehicle under fire.
It could be a scene plucked from the pages of an insurgent handbook, but Inbody wants to rewrite the ending.
So we made a little swing out, put the missile in place. Missile's off the rail, looks good. Comes down. Poof, and no more.
Over the next 30 days, Apache pilots logged more than 3,000 hours in the air.
We went street by street, taking them out 24 hours a day. There were 6 aircraft in the air. And we were toe-to-toe them pretty solid for about 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks. And when I say toe-to-toe, I mean as kinetic of a fight as I think anybody's ever seen on TV.
The Apache's power beats back the guerrilla forces, allowing Iraqi police and U.S. troops to regain control of the streets.
At the end of about the 30th day, Muqtada al-Sadr called it quits.
The Apaches send a clear message to Muqtada al-Sadr's insurgents and to ground troops that they've got their back.
When that guy walked out into the street with his AK and was ready to, pick a fight with somebody, he was picking a fight with me.
The mission's success is a huge reward for the Apache and its supporters. Validation after decades of controversy. From the beginning, critics said the Apache never should have been born at all. 1966. The Soviet Union and its allies stockpile tanks along the borders of West Germany. It's the Cold War, and the Soviets are looking to expand. The Pentagon watches with a wary eye. It knows that even its best planes won't be able to stop the Russian threat.
The big challenge for American pilots was that they had huge numbers of Soviet tanks to attack.
Roger Connor is a curator in the National Air and Space Museum's Aeronautics Department.
The United States had to defend against a very sophisticated Soviet anti-aircraft system, both in terms of low-level, heavy machine guns, also very sophisticated anti-aircraft missiles.
Air Force bombers aren't maneuverable enough to defend against the Soviet weapons, and they fly too high to see what they're fighting.
If you're up in the air several thousands of feet and you're looking down on the ground, there could be tanks all over the place, but you'd never see them. So they decided they needed to develop a helicopter that was designed specifically for this ground attack mission.
Al Wynn was the vice president of Boeing's Apache program and an engineer at the U.S. Army's Aviation Research and Development Command.
The best way to see a tank is to visually see the tank. And that's why the helicopter's more beneficial than a fixed wing, because it gets down close to the ground.
An attack helicopter isn't a new idea. The Army is already using them in Vietnam.
Vietnam was the first application where aviation became part of the ground war. It started out where they started arming Hueys. That's how they first started out, by just throwing machine guns and rockets and carrying them on the side of Hueys to provide close combat support for the soldiers. And then the Cobra was the first real dedicated gunship, where they basically just took a Huey and put a skinny fuselage on it with a turreted gun and some wing store stations so they could carry rockets. And that was the beginning of the attack helicopter.
The improvised gunships are better than nothing, but the Army wants more. With Vietnam in full swing, Army brass focused their efforts on developing a helicopter that's fast, armed, and heavily armored. They call it the Cheyenne.
The Army came up with a requirement where they wanted to develop an attack helicopter, not build it off something else, and that's what the Cheyenne was.
When it debuts in 1967, the Cheyenne is like no helicopter the world has ever seen. It has wings. The Army claims the gunship can face down any foe, but the Air Force complains that the Cheyenne is flying into their territory.
After the passage of the National Security Act in 1947, the Air Force restricted the Army to really very light aircraft. In 1966, with the Johnson-McConnell Agreement, the Army agreed to stay out of the fixed-wing attack aircraft in exchange for having essentially full authority to develop the helicopter as an offensive weapon.
The $4.5 million Cheyenne never gets out of the gate.
Air Force advocates, like Senator Barry Goldwater, decided that they would like to kill the program.
But the Army has seen into the future and likes what it sees. An attack helicopter is worth fighting for.
The reality was the Army really wanted and needed this aircraft, and they were going to fight for it.
Less than 3 weeks after top brass canceled the Cheyenne, the Army goes back to the drawing board with an even more ambitious program.
When it first started, the Advanced Attack Helicopter program seemed something like a pipe dream. It specified an aircraft that had to operate at night in bad weather, had to have a precision strike capability. It also had to have very sophisticated defensive systems.
In 1976, the Army awards a contract for a new advanced attack helicopter to one of the country's oldest aerospace and defense companies, Hughes Aircraft.
Hughes really hit the ball out of the park with the Apache design that they put forward.
September 30th, 1983, Mesa, Arizona. Weeks ahead of schedule, Hughes Aircraft rolls out the prototype for the U.S. Army's new attack helicopter. They call it the Apache. The Apache is designed to keep flying through thick and thin. Almost every element has a backup, including the crew.
You've got 2 crew members forward and aft. The front seat is the co-pilot gunner. Typically that crew member is associated with using the sensors, actioning the weapons, and talking on all the radios to the supported ground units. This is the pilot's crew station, the back of the 2. The pilot's primary responsibility during a mission is keeping the aircraft clear, terrain, other aircraft that you're operating with. Still hear me?
The 2 GE turboshaft engines boast enough power to take the aircraft home, even if one of them is knocked out.
Most systems on this aircraft are redundant, as in there's 2 of them. So if one system on one side of the aircraft is hit by a bullet from the ground or takes some other kind of combat damage or just goes out, you should have another opposite located system in order to back that up.
The Apache is tough enough to withstand significant damage.
The aircraft is extremely hardy, is extremely resistant. I have personal friends that have taken a rocket-propelled grenade to this aircraft, continued the mission, and taken it back safely.
It's one of the most heavily fortified and well-armed helicopters ever built. It's constructed to attack and to win.
Army aviators were truly awed by the Apache. It represented a capability that most of them had only dreamed of.
But 4 years after it debuts, the Army's dreams turn to nightmares. As the Apache is field tested at Fort Rucker, Alabama, it crashes twice within a month.
The initial fielding, there were reliability issues on the airplane. And there actually were a couple instances where the airplane actually crashed.
One crash is blamed on an electrical failure, the other on pilot error. Engineers knew the Apache was hard to build. Now they discover it's also hard to fly.
This proved to be a major black eye for the Apache. Many saw this as a validation of their criticism of the Army and saw it as an opportunity to push back against using the Apache.
The Army promises its critics that the 2 accidents are freak occurrences and that the ship is safe to fly. But less than a month later, the Apache's reputation goes from bad to worse. August 1987, Fort Rucker, Alabama. A brand new Apache hovers in a routine training practice. 200 feet above the ground, it suddenly drops. The gunship hits the ground. The gunner sustains major injuries. The pilot is killed. It's the Apache's third major accident in less than 2 months, and the first fatal crash. This time, the repercussions reach all the way to the Pentagon. Within a week, military leaders ground the entire fleet of 264 Apaches. They're defeated even before they've seen combat. An investigation reveals that the $11.5 million machine was brought down by a defective bearing in the tail rotor.
The Army formed the AAT, the Apache Action Team. So the team meet regularly, work together, identifying the problems and coming up with rapid fixes and improvements to those to eliminate them.
Within just a few months, safety officials clear the gunships to resume operation, but the bad taste lingers.
Anything that was seen as a high-cost budget item that didn't work exactly as advertised was always going to be deemed at risk. There was a huge public outcry that the machine isn't safe, that it's not going to be anywhere as capable as was advertised.
With the chopper's reputation at stake, there's more pressure than ever on the men and women who fly it. Aspiring pilots have to learn the gunship inside and out. Apache pilots must spend hundreds of hours simulating worst-case scenarios, avoiding surface-to-air missiles, losing a tail rotor mid-air, landing with one engine. It's all covered.
You want to be able to react without having to think through the process. It becomes really important during emergencies because you don't have as much leeway to do the things that you would normally do.
The learning curve is steep. It's information overload.
Day one, you're in that thing. It's pretty intense. It truly is drinking from a fire hose, and you're just trying to keep your head above water.
There's no shortage of men and women who want the job, but not all of the pilots who start the program make the cut. Those that do become part of the Army's elite.
It takes an extremely exceptional, extremely talented, extremely dedicated individual to handle that stress load. It requires phenomenal situational awareness because you're controlling an 8-ton object in 3 dimensions of movement at night with people shooting at you. You're talking to 5 different radios, and maybe you're shooting back at somebody.
Apache pilots train hard, and finally, some of them get the chance to test their skills in combat. (1989) Panama. General Manuel Noriega is losing his grip as the country's ruler. 6 years of a ruthless dictatorship has turned his own people against him and the U.S. government, who first helped put him in power.
He should leave Panama, and we want to see a return to civilian democratic rule.
In October, some of Noriega's own generals try to overthrow him. They fail. Noriega accuses the United States of provoking the coup, and on December 15th, he declares a state of war. The U.S. immediately authorizes an invasion.
We will not be intimidated by the bullying tactics, brutal though they may be, of the dictator Noriega.
It's the U.S. Army's first war since they got the Apache. They call it Operation Just Cause.
And it was going to be ground forces going in. And so they wanted to bring air power in to support them. The Apache was their most advanced, most capable attack helicopter, and this was their first chance to see it in operation.
The Army usually rolls out its new toys with a lot of fanfare. This time, it doesn't. The Pentagon only informs one group about the Apache's impending debut, the troops.
By sending the Apaches to Panama, the Army said to the troops on the ground there that we're behind you 100%. We're going to send our latest, greatest weapon system to support you in this operation.
The gunship's go-to weapon? The Hellfire. It's the most potent helicopter-launched missile the Army's ever had.
The Apache could carry 16 Hellfire missiles. So fundamentally, you can take out 16 threats.
For an Army that prides itself on precision warfare, the Hellfire is the perfect killing tool.
The Hellfire is the Apache's ultimate accessory. A lot of times, targets today are insurgents that are in close proximity to non-combatants. The Hellfire gives Apache crews the ability to single out the enemy while also not harming innocent civilians that are nearby.
The dense urban landscape of Operation Just Cause offers the Hellfire the perfect test. Here's how it works. When soldiers on the ground come under fire, they call the Apache, telling the gunship's pilot where they think the fire is coming from. Flying above, the Apache gets the information. Its gunner uses his thermal vision to verify the intel. Once he verifies the target, he designates the target with a laser. The laser sends back a coded signal, giving the missile the exact coordinates of its target. Once the laser locks in, it's all over.
A Hellfire missile is a laser-guided missile. So a Hellfire will go to that pinpoint, and that is the only damage that occurs.
Unparalleled precision strike capability. For the Army, it's a long-awaited dream come true.
The ability to see targets a long way off, select them, and then hit them with a precision strike capability like the Hellfire has made the Apache a devastating battlefield weapon.
American troops went into action at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there was fierce fighting in and around Panama City.
The 6 Apaches in Panama rack up 240 combat hours. The gunships defend 26,000 soldiers. They pull their weight in some of the conflict's heaviest fighting. Noriega's troops fight with all they have, surface-to-air missiles, machine gun fire. But the Apache has a thick skin.
The Apaches received their baptism of fire in Panama, literally. Several Apaches were hit. Many were hit over a dozen times, and these aircraft successfully made it back to base without loss.
The Army's gamble pays off. The debut of their attack helicopter and its powerful new Hellfire missile is impressive.
The commanders on the ground in Panama were very excited to have the Apache. They were thrilled with the results that they achieved.
The Army brags about the Apache's performance, but there's another side to the story.
There were people who said, you know, this was just kind of showing off, that, you know, it was just kind of throwing something in there for the sake of saying, you know, it's seen action for the first time.
Congress focuses on the superhuman effort it takes to keep the gunships flying.
Congressional investigators are recommending that the Army scrap its plans to buy 132 helicopters. During the early hours of last December's invasion of Panama, the Apaches didn't work very well.
After only 1 day of fighting, broken parts sidelined 4 of the 6 Apaches sent for combat.
The airplane did exhibit some of these reliability issues that the operators and the maintainers had to overcome. They did, but they shouldn't have had to overcome those that shouldn't have happened.
Army maintainers discover that rain and moisture are the machine's Achilles heel.
This was a new environment, very wet, raining all the time and everything like that. It was the first time the airplane had been in that kind of environment, and we found out, and, you know, it leaked a little bit and that type of thing. But that's kind of the things you'd kind of discovered.
Spare parts for the machine are hard to come by. To repair wounded choppers, the Army steals parts from Apaches on the assembly line.
One key disadvantage of the Apache is that it's a very difficult aircraft to maintain. It's very complex. You need special tools, you need special parts. You're not going to use chewing gum and duct tape to keep the aircraft going.
A report from the U.S. Government Accounting Office calls the Apache too labor-intensive and too complicated to fly.
A newly released congressional report says the Apache helicopter may be useless because it needs too much maintenance.
Congress recommends that the Army stop production immediately. Just when it thought it was out of the woods, the Apache finds itself having to prove itself yet again. Before Congress can shut production down, war intervenes again. But this time the Apache has to face something else it wasn't designed for. Not water and humidity, but sand. August 1990. Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein sends his army into neighboring Kuwait. Its oil fields are rich for the taking, and Hussein may have his eye on Saudi oil too. Saudi Arabia quickly gathers its allies. The 39-nation coalition is the largest since World War II. They vow to bring Hussein to his knees.
Withdraw from Kuwait or face a coalition ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
The plan is to begin an air war using high-flying airplanes and cruise missiles. But there's a problem.
Early on, it was discovered for the air campaign that there were several radar sites with the early warning radar to protect Baghdad.
General Richard A. Cody was Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He commanded the 101st Airborne Division of Apache helicopters in Operation Desert Storm.
The special operations guys came up and said, you know, there's 3 radar sites. If we can take them out, that'll give us an edge to start the air campaign. They wanted to create a corridor, if you will, so the F-17s and the F-16s and F-15s and Tornadoes and all the other coalition aircraft could fly through this corridor.
Baghdad is one of the most heavily defended cities in the world. Clearing its skies is a formidable task. To reach the radar site, the Apaches will have to avoid Iraq's high-tech anti-aircraft weaponry for 200 dangerous miles.
I don't think we felt safe. What happens if, you know, somebody takes a shot at one of the aircraft? In other words, we're flying in somebody else's country.
Taking out the radar sites won't be easy, but if the Apache can't do it, nothing can.
The Apache was the only one that had the precision firepower, the durability in terms of survivability to get in there and do this job.
Army brass are nervous. They know the Apache could have challenges in a desert environment.
Helicopters and turbine engines hate sand. Jet engines have compressors, and as sand gets ingested into it, it erodes and it starts taking away from the power and capability.
Cody and the other Apache pilots know they're not only fighting the enemy, but fighting for the reputation of their aircraft. A mishap here could end the entire program. January 17th, 1991, midnight, Al Jaff Air Force Base in Saudi Arabia. 8 Apaches from the 101st Airborne Division prepare for the 200-mile flight into Iraq. In this mission, more than any other, timing is everything.
We had to take out the radar sites at 2:38 in the morning, so all the aircraft could fly through this corridor.
The Apaches take off and speed across the desert, cruising just 50 feet above the ground to avoid radar detection. There's a total blackout on navigation lights, total radio silence. If Hussein's radar detects them, they risk being shot down by the very target they've come to kill. The Apaches are all too aware of the danger.
The estimates were we'd probably get 1 or 2 aircraft shot down. I mean, basically, you're flying a helicopter against a system designed to shoot down aircraft.
It takes just over 2 hours for the Apaches to reach the radar towers. When they're 5 miles away, they hover for a moment, surveying their target. This is actual footage from General Cody's mission, the very first Apache strikes of Desert Storm.
When we pulled the trigger, all 4 aircraft shot at the same time. You got 4 to 6 Hellfires en route. The time of flight's about 12 seconds. And then all of a sudden they start hitting. And when they start hitting it, things start exploding pretty quickly, especially when we hit the where the generators and all the fuel was.
Okay, go to Flechette's right here. Do it.
At about 4 kilometers, we started opening up with the rockets that had the Flechette rounds, and that was to take out the air defense guns that were out in front. And then as we get closer, we'd open up with the 30 millimeter and finish off the job.
It's 4 minutes of mayhem with 100% destruction.
We put in excess of about 40 Hellfire missiles on the target, a couple hundred Flechette rockets and a lot of 30 millimeter, and then broke and flew low level back.
Destroying the radar towers opens up a piece of the sky 20 miles wide.
About 5 minutes into the flight back, we could see the jets coming in right over our head. And that's how the air war started.
Over 900 coalition aircraft make their way into Baghdad. Safe passage, courtesy of the Apache.
No aircraft got shot down through that corridor or into Baghdad that night.
The Apaches destroy hundreds of tanks, armored personnel carriers, and other vehicles. Together, 277 Apaches log thousands of combat hours, successfully withstanding small arms fire with just one incident.
We had one aircraft take 5 bullet holes through his rotor blades. And he was able to fly that aircraft all the way back to Saudi Arabia. That speaks to the durability and the survivability of that aircraft.
The sand that the Army feared would hurt the Apache's performance proves to be a non-issue.
It proved to everybody that it is a great helicopter and still is. It's still the best attack helicopter in the world, bar none.
Its masterful performance in Desert Storm makes the Apache appear invincible. But their next conflict proves that the Apache is only as good as its support system. April 1999. President Bill Clinton signs an order sending 24 Apaches to a remote airbase in Albania.
I have ordered our aircraft to be ready to act as part of a NATO operation.
They're tasked with an urgent mission: to stop Yugoslav leader Slobodan Milosevic's murderous ethnic cleansing campaign in neighboring Kosovo.
Task Force Hawks was to set up the ability for the Apaches to go in and start taking on Milosevic's forces without putting boots on the ground, but getting in close with Apaches.
The Army claims that the birds are combat ready.
The Apaches will be coming here very shortly.
A month later, Milosevic's troops are still on a rampage, and the Apaches still haven't arrived. While war rages in Serbia, the Apaches wait on an Italian airbase 500 miles away. The decision to send them to Kosovo is easy. Actually getting them there is not.
They not only had to move the aircraft, but they had to move this very complex logistical support system with it.
Wherever the Apache goes, 26,000 tons of equipment and dozens of maintainers must follow.
You got the maintenance that you have to bring in, you have the refuel capability, the amount of ammunition you need.
All that shipping and support for just 24 aircraft isn't cheap. The total cost to the U.S. taxpayer, $480 million.
The Apache is a much more complex and difficult aircraft to operate in the field than its predecessors. It requires much more expensive parts and facilities to keep it going.
The Apache's size is another issue. Flying a modern new gunship out of a tiny airbase proves problematic.
The airfield wasn't ready. We had a huge amount of rain, and the place was just muddy. At the same time, we were bringing in supplies, and the airfield itself wasn't ready to accept the Apaches.
The Army works around the clock for days, building an environment sturdy enough for the 24 gunships.
This was not a NATO airbase at all, and so getting that airbase set so that you could launch night attacks with Apaches took some time.
Ground troops bring in 667,000 square meters of rockfill. Army engineers construct 58 specially designed landing pads for the Apache base.
We had to get the helipads right, we had to get the arming pads right, the fuel system right, and all those things. Once it was ready, we brought them in.
The Apache's arrival should have been the turning point in the war. Yet within days, it would prove to be one of the conflict's most regretted and deadly decisions. May 4th, 1999. 45 miles north of Tirana-Renas Airfield in Albania. An Apache crew gets ready to train with ground troops in the dead of night. The Apache takes off, planning to meet up with the troops on the next ridge. Suddenly, the unthinkable happens. This is actual footage from that night. As the ground crew looks on, the Apache drops out of sight. Then,
we had one crash early on. It was a young crew, unfortunately. They hit, rolled over, the aircraft got on fire. Both pilots escaped.
2 weeks later, another Apache crew is not so lucky.
It was two great pilots, and it was flying on one of our last mission rehearsals, and they had a malfunction with their flight control system. It basically rendered the aircraft uncontrollable, and they crashed it. And both of them died.
In another setting, a pilot might be able to adjust quickly if things go wrong. But in Albania's unforgiving terrain, even the smallest problem becomes magnified.
Undulating, sharp mountain ridges, valleys, the Venturi effect of winds changing inside these canyons. When you're flying nap of the earth fully loaded, and it's dark, and you've got to maneuver in and out, it's a workload.
The Apache pilots in Task Force Hawk continue to train for weeks, but not a single one ever sees action.
We never launched the aircraft across, but the Apache community learned a lot from Task Force Hawk. You have to really know your aircraft because, you know, at 50 feet or 100 feet, things happen very, very quickly. You have to really be on your game the whole time. It's a pretty complex aircraft.
Today, pilots and maintainers work tirelessly to support the Apache and its reputation.
There's no way to really know everything that there is about this aircraft, but the more you know, the better that you are, because in the aviation world, knowledge is power.
Coordination between pilots and maintainers is better than ever before.
There has to be this level of trust in between the pilot and the crew chief, so the pilot can trust him to know that this aircraft is going to be safe.
15 years after Task Force Hawk, the Apache has worked out most of its kinks. It's been used in almost every combat environment, and in almost every one, it's proven a star.
The Apache has proven extremely adaptable to the nature of this modern warfare. The combination of sophisticated sensors, the Hellfire missile, are what is shaping modern warfare today.
As the world's most famous attack helicopter, it's no wonder other countries want it too. Boeing sells Apaches to allies in 15 other countries, including South Korea, the Netherlands, Egypt, and Israel. Pilots from the United Kingdom have an especially loyal association and appreciation.
This aircraft, the Apache, is designed to take you to a hostile environment. It's designed to look after you while you're there, give you enough time and space and protection to do your job.
You see people put down weapons, you see people go back into their houses. It's a branding. People know how good this machine is, and they're fearful of it.
The U.S. Army Apache fleet has accumulated more than 3 million flight hours since it first took to the skies. Some say it's just getting warmed up. In February 2013, Boeing debuted an even deadlier version of the aircraft, the AH-64E Apache Guardian.
The latest Apache, the AH-64E Guardian, is the Apache for the internet age. It allows the co-pilot gunner to actually operate the sensors on unmanned aerial vehicles, and the Apache crews can actually pick out targets from behind a hill using those unmanned aerial vehicles without any risk to themselves.
In other words, the brand new Apache Guardian flies with its own mini Apache drone.
The crew controls that unmanned air vehicle, and it's out flying ahead of the Apache, identifying what's going on out there, what threat systems there are, so they can be flying along and be looking what's happening in the next valley over, 30 kilometers away.
The combat-proven Apache helicopter is the U.S. Army's most lethal aircraft. It's persevered in the face of technical challenges, triumphed over weaknesses, and become the gold standard for attack helicopters today.
There's other weapon systems out there, but if you want 100% success and you want to be able to shut that stuff down immediately, that's the aircraft to do it in.
Highly maneuverable and heavily armed, the AH-64 Apache is unique in its class. Bold, brave, devastatingly powerful, and it shows no signs of stopping.